Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. A question that hangs over every serious bonsai practitioner's head is, what's the best way to learn? For decades, the gold standard has been the traditional apprenticeship in Japan. But what does that model look like when it's translated to an American context? Today's guest has lived that experience. I'm really excited to be joined by my friend and one of my teachers, Andrew Robson. He's one of the few professionals in the U.S. who trained in a formal apprenticeship, not in Japan, but in the U.S., under Michael Hagedorn. Andrew represents a new generation of American bonsai professionals. We're going to dive into what his apprenticeship was really like and what we as hobbyists can learn from his journey. Andrew, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to chat with you this evening. Obviously, as a bonsai teacher, teaching bonsai is something I think about pretty much nonstop. So happy to dive into some good strategies for learning bonsai if you don't have 3 to 5 years of your life to give up and go study with someone.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to ask a few questions about your apprenticeship to get a better feel for that, and then
Yeah.
would love to hear your thoughts on tips for hobbyists around learning. Before you started your apprenticeship, what did your bonsai journey look like?
Yeah, before I started my apprenticeship, my bonsai journey was pretty extensive. I started when I was in middle school. I saw bonsai at a Japanese festival, the Missouri Botanical Garden. And so I was there. I got obsessed with it, just seeing the local show that the club would do. And so I got my first tree at that show from one of the vendors. And in order for me to get that tree, the deal was from my dad, who bought it for me, that I had to join the local club and do like a full year's worth of meetings in order to get the tree, just to learn how to take care of it. So that actually ended up being super healthy because, I walk in the club as like a 13, 14, 15-year-old, something like that. And there's all these 50-year-old plus people who are just like swarming to me because they see the future. And back then, it wasn't really like a cool thing to do bonsai when you were young. It was pretty much a old man's thing, much more so than it is these days. And so it was. That was kind of how I got started. Not too long after that, when I was in high school, I did a workshop with Taiga Urshibata and a big Shohin convention. So that was a lot of fun and some exposure to higher level bonsai. We were also in a study group with Michael Hagedorn when I was in high school. So he would come out and work with some people in St. Louis a few times a year. And so I kind of got exposed to high level bonsai through that. Went to college, kind of did bonsai kind of all throughout college. And even thought of switching my major in college to do bonsai full time to like a horticulture degree, something like that. But it was kind of after I completed grad school, was doing a lot of work in New York City in music performance, that I realized that path wasn't going to be sustainable. So I kind of wrapped up my music career, packed my bags, moved to Oregon, and started my apprenticeship with Michael.
Yeah, you've had quite the journey in bonsai. I think it's awesome that some of your trees are still alive from that very beginning, from that workshop with Taiga and stuff like that. I love that juniper that you have. And it's very cool that you managed to get to the elite tier within, the musical practice and then, transition to something, right? So I don't know. I think folks sometimes feel like boxed in, like, oh, I've put so much time and effort into this thing, I have to do it for the rest of my life. But you had the courage to kind of like make a transition whenever you realized that wasn't right for you. And you're
Yeah.
at the top of your game in something, a totally different field. Right?
Yeah, I just started a career in classical music. I remember I was actually having the conversation with Michael about coming out and doing an apprenticeship when I was in a dressing room at Avery Fisher Hall, New York, or at Lincoln Center. So I'm like at Lincoln Center in a dressing room talking to Michael about how I don't enjoy what I'm doing and I kind of want to study bonsai. So that was kind of a good way to wrap up that part of things. But yeah, but I feel like all of my creative energy from music just 100% shifted to bonsai, and it's been really fun to explore kind of the visual art of bonsai rather than the performance art that I was doing before.
Yeah. Was that transition scary, or were you 100% ready to move to bonsai whenever you made the decision, or was there fear of like, oh yeah, I'm leaving behind this other thing that I put a lot of time into?
It was a little bit scary, but I could see bonsai. Classical music was kind of dying. The state of classical music is not great in America. If you're an orchestra trying to get people to come to a concert, a lot of people don't really care. It's kind of lost its relevance to a degree to the masses. But bonsai has been kind of the opposite. It's kind of booming right now, and so like it's I kind of saw that there was a different energy behind bonsai, and it was just kind of starting when I started my apprenticeship, and so yeah, I kind of wanted to be a part of that kind of booming energy that bonsai had to it, and that made the switch easier. It also made it easier that my teacher who I studied with made the switch much later in life than I did. I think I was around 25 when I started my apprenticeship, or maybe 24, something like that. And Michael was, I think, 35 when he went to Japan. So I was like, if he could do it, then it'd be no problem for me.
Yeah, Michael's an excellent example. I really enjoyed his book, Post Dated, which talks about his apprenticeship in Japan. And even in a very traditional model of apprenticeship, he was able to succeed even at an age that's different than I think most apprenticeships start in Japan. So it sounds like you were already engaged with Michael, but was the decision to apprentice with him kind of a no-brainer in terms of choosing a teacher, or how did you go through that process of like, hey, I'm going to dedicate to myself to this? Who you apprentice under is obviously a very big decision. So how did you make that call?
Yeah, so I had I had a personal relationship, kind of teacher-student relationship with him, kind of previously, so that made it a lot easier. I also really respected his work a lot, so that made it pretty easy too. At the time, if I was going to study in the States, there was only really three options. There was Boone, which hadn't ever done any apprentices at the time. There was Ryan, and there was Michael. And of the three, Michael's trees are the trees that I most strongly responded to. And so that kind of made it a no-brainer to work with him. But I guess the decision at large was do I go to Japan or do I go to the US? And I think I really zeroed in on the US because number one, there was someone who was making really high-level trees. So I figured if that mindset was there, and that practice was there of making really high level trees, and I can learn that too, no matter if they're not Japanese or they're not in Japan. But also, I felt like it was important to be immersed in the community that I was going to be a professional of, and so doing bonsai in America, going to the U.S. National Show, going to the Arzens Cup, like being brought up in that environment, working on trees that are U.S. trees like ponderosa pine, which I would never get to work on in Japan. Working on, honestly, a lot of, lower quality non-Japanese trees. Like all of those things together really piled on that America was the right place for me to study.
That makes a lot of sense. I think I talked with Sam in the last episode about choosing a teacher, and one of the things we said is you need to like what your teacher's trees looks like, right? And you need to like what their garden looks like. And so it was interesting to hear you echo that in your apprenticeship decision.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things in picking a teacher is it's like if you don't respond emotionally to their work, then you're not with the right person. It's not to say that someone else can't help you, but like I don't know. If you want to learn an ecosystem of knowledge to build bonsai, there's a lot of different ways to build bonsai. And there's colleagues of mine like Peter T or Ryan Neal that make wonderful bonsai, but it's a very different bonsai than what I'm making. And I'd like to think we're all making our styles at a very high level, but we're doing something totally different. And so, you can't take Ryan's fertilizer system and apply it to my trees if you want the same result. Like all these things kind of work together. And so,
yeah, it's a system.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And like from the music world, that was just like you study with someone who you want to sound like that. Just kind of that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and what were one, did you already know you were trying to be a bonsai professional whenever you sought out the apprenticeship? Like you were already trying to do it as a professional, or you just wanted to learn more about it? Had you already decided what your business was going to be?
Yeah, I hadn't decided anything about the business, but I knew that I couldn't do anything but bonsai. Like I knew, like this is what I was thinking about all the time. Even throughout all my intense music study and performances, like I'd be performing at Lincoln Center in New York and thinking about trees when I'm on stage. So like that wasn't sustainable. So I knew like I had to do bonsai, and I think that's something that's important for anyone who's considering this as like a career. Like you really you shouldn't do it if you want to do it. You should only do it if you have to do it. And even then, you should still think about it really carefully. But yeah, I kind of had no other choice. Like there was no other kind of path for me. It was like I tried doing something else that didn't work. My body kind of fought it. like. Yeah, so I knew I would end up doing it professionally in some way, shape, or form. I didn't know what that would look like until kind of partway or after my apprenticeship. But yeah, that was very much the intent from the beginning, or from the decision to make that shift.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that you were also considering like changing majors in college, for example. Didn't realize that that was a kind of a thought that had been in your mind.
Yeah, I thought of when I was in undergrad, I thought about switching to, I think I was looking at Michigan or something, their horticulture program. I'm so glad that I didn't. I'm so glad because I honestly think having a horticulture degree brings you nothing in bonsai, like absolutely nothing. We talk about that. That's maybe a different topic. I'm glad that I kind of went down the path that I went down because it exposed me to really high quality art of a different kind, and now I'm able to kind of translate what I learned from that world into the bonsai world.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's good to have that exposure to like a more mature art form in the US at least, right?
Yeah.
Or the high level of a mature art
Hmm.
form so that you can translate that, right? Because
Yeah.
you might not have gotten that same experience in the US if you just went right into bonsai and didn't have that same ecosystem around it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. So, what were your expectations going into the apprenticeship in terms of like what did you actually talk through with Michael about, hey, this is what this is going to look like?
Going into the apprenticeship, it was basically, I don't think we actually really had a formal talk about, what we were going to cover or whatnot. We had to talk about a time commitment.
Mm,
And I did a 3-year apprenticeship. That was what we agreed to. And then about the year after my third year, I worked in the garden kind of part time, kind of while I was getting my business up and running, while I didn't have a garden of my own or a studio of my own to work in. And so I really did 4 years basically. But yeah, it was kind of just, I just trusted Michael and I kind of trusted the process. And I knew that if I was going to work with him full time, that he'd take care of the rest. And I think that just goes into the topic of teacher selection. That makes a big difference in knowing what you're going to get out of it.
yeah. So were you living on site? Were you working there full time? Like, what did the actual mechanics of it look like?
Yeah, I was the first year I had an apartment, and then the following 3 years I lived on site.
Wow.
Michael built a tiny house. I actually helped him build the tiny house. I did all the electrical and the siding and a few other things. And so we would like wrap up with bonsai at like 4 p.m. and go work on the tiny house like in the evenings. So yeah, we built that together over the course of like 6 to 9 months. But once that was done, I moved into his property, and since then, his apprentices kind of live on site there. Yeah, it's a full time job. I mean, bonsai don't get to take days off, and so if you're doing bonsai, if you have bonsai, you don't get to take days off either. So even if there was a day off, like tomorrow, I technically don't have any work scheduled. It's a day off for me, but like I still need to water the garden twice. I probably need to go out and do some other tasks. So
Yeah, yeah. So, well, it's interesting that Michael has had a series of American apprenticeships, right?
Mhm.
He has had multiple apprentices, and to my knowledge, I mean, there's a few people I think that are taking on apprentices. Like I think Ryan has a new apprentice potentially, and then
Mhm.
Dogwood Studios on the East Coast. So it seems like that type of model is getting more popular. But I'm curious, like, what do you think made the apprenticeship?
For an apprenticeship to succeed, you need the right apprentice and the right master that's being apprenticed under. For example, like you can do it. There's probably more people who have done a bonsai apprenticeship that aren't doing bonsai today than there are that have. Meaning, like the actual success rate of someone who's going to have a long lasting career after an apprenticeship is below 50%. So just because it doesn't matter if you study in the U.S. or Japan. There's many people who went and did a formal, 3+ year apprenticeship in Japan that are no longer doing bonsai. They didn't kind of they didn't last.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like going to college. Like I know a lot of people who went to law school who aren't lawyers ended up doing something else in life. Just because you graduate doesn't that's just half of it. But you need to study with the right teacher to get a good core foundation of information, and just kind of you're more so learning kind of the bonsai lifestyle more than anything else. And then you have to be the right kind of person who has the drive to then succeed at a career. And having doing bonsai professionally and as a business is a very, very hard way to make money. and a hard thing to kind of keep up with. But yeah, like I said, I couldn't do anything else. So I think I had the right drive for the career. And the necessity to need to do it, and I had the right teacher to give me a really solid foundation. So I think both
Yeah,
those aspects are super important.
interesting. Whenever we hear about, and I actually don't know the exact mechanics of Japanese apprenticeships, but in my imagination, it's like, oh, the first year you sweep floors, and then, the second year you might, pick up pots and move them around or something like that. But I
Yeah.
imagine in the American context, like that's probably not how things went. Like, what was your experience like with Michael in terms of the on ramp to actually doing bonsai work, and like the percentage of your time that was spent on bonsai versus, building tiny homes or keeping the
Yeah,
upkeep
yeah.
of the business?
I mean, like definitely 90% of, or 100% of like 9 to 5, hours in the day, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're done doing bonsai. And I think the way Michael runs his garden, the apprentice is responsible for probably 90% of the tree work in that garden. Meaning Michael's coming and doing some work, but and definitely checking all the work that I'm doing. I put, probably 95% of the wire on every tree in that garden and bent 95% of the branches and did 95% of the pruning and all that stuff. Definitely under a lot of guidance and with a lot of checking and editing, of course. Michael's garden, I was really responsible for the labor and upkeep of the garden. And I wouldn't have that any other way. I know people who did apprenticeships in America where they didn't get to do any of that. They were just, there to water the trees and kind of, you know, not much else. And so there's definitely a spectrum in the U.S. of what a student gets, and that's why I think I kind of got lucky to a degree. I didn't really know to think about that going forwards, but I picked the right teacher, and it just kind of worked out.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is sometimes categorized or we think about in terms of Japanese apprenticeships is, learn by just seeing, like you're trying to steal these
Mm-hmm.
secrets from your master, as opposed to in American context, I think it's more common for someone to say things, right? Teach you, kind of guide you directly. What kind of approach did Michael take with you?
Yeah, it was definitely, I probably asked way more questions than he cared to answer. But I mean, there's definitely both, right? And there is a lot of talking, like probably more talking than there is in Japan. I don't really know that I buy that assessment of Japanese apprenticeships. Like that might be some people's journey and maybe an older way of doing things. But if you read Michael's book, Post Dated, about his experience with Japan, I think most of that is more of a language barrier than it is a lack of communication, an intentional lack of communication. So I don't know. I definitely asked a ton of questions. I would try and edit up and save my questions because I had more than probably Michael. I didn't want to annoy him with stuff. But I definitely pushed for that. I definitely asked him as many questions as I could. Every day at lunch, I would pull out a Kokafu book and ask him questions about trees that I had studied the night before. And so I definitely spent a lot of time picking his brain about stuff. And I think not doing that would be a big wasted opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're with someone who's dedicated their life to bonsai and is as obsessed with it as you are, right? But just further down the line in terms of experience. So it makes sense to take advantage of that person. The other thing I think that is difficult for a hobbyist to develop from their hobby practice of bonsai is kind of like the discipline and the understanding of being able to do bonsai techniques day in and day out, which is really what it takes to make a bonsai, right, over time. So did you feel like because you had that, 3-4 years of dedicated time, like that really, is that something unique to apprenticeships? Is that something that a hobbyist could develop as well? I guess I'm asking, is there kind of an intangible discipline that you develop doing an apprenticeship that you think a hobbyist needs to be really intentional if they want to try to get that same experience?
I think so. I think during an apprenticeship, I was learning at 200 miles an hour versus any time before that, even consuming as much content as I could and everything. I was only learning at 20 miles an hour. And so I think it's so important if you want to learn bonsai, and you don't necessarily have to be an apprentice to do that. But I think someone coming to my garden and pulling weeds for 2 weeks could learn more in the 2 weeks just pulling weeds and just being in an environment where high level bonsai are being created than they could with 2 years worth of YouTube videos or instructional videos, paid subscription videos. I think being like physically, bonsai is such a tactile thing that physically just being in a space where high level bonsai are being made and being a fly on the wall, I think you're going to learn more. That's the tough thing about this, is because if you live in the middle of Nebraska, you don't have like somewhere to go do that. But that's where, I don't know, that for me, like I was probably going to move to Portland regardless of whether I came here for bonsai or not, just because there was a bonsai scene kind of here building up, and like I knew I wanted to be kind of a part of that and around that, just because I knew from music, like if you want to get good at music, like you need to be surrounded by other people who are good at music. There's no way to get good in this little vacuum by yourself. At least get good fast.
Yeah, I agree with that. So do you think the consecutive nature of the hours that you were putting in, the number of hours, or I guess what's the most important factor in the learning? The fact that the hours were 2 weeks in a period in a row, or is that the same as getting like 2 days every month for a year? Like which of those experiences do you think is the most valuable? That might be a hard question, but
It's a hard question. I think sitting on your couch at home is the least valuable thing. And
okay.
so like if the best that you can do is 2 days a month, then do that. If the best that you can do is 2 weeks every couple months, do that. If the best is you can do is a 3-year apprenticeship, do that. Like I think the more time spent in a high level place of learning, and that's the other tough thing, is like if you come here for 2 weeks, you're going to learn the thing that we're doing here for 2 weeks that part of the year, but then you come 6 months later and we're doing something totally different. So like you really do have to, I think it really is important to like dedicate a multi-year span and just kind of see that process over and over and over again, rather than seeing little fractals of it.
Yeah, and it has to be in a consistent manner, right? Like I think that's definitely been my experience where I can't go learn something in like spring techniques from one teacher and then I'm not like magically making the same tree as them just because I learned one little segment of spring. Like you need to get the full experience of like how do they build their trees over a multi-year time span
Yeah.
in order to like get the result that they have. Even just 1 year of the full gamut of their techniques doesn't get you to building the trees that they're building. I think online material, the comment that you made about that as well is interesting. The nice thing is like online platforms like YouTube or Mirai Live or Bonsai U or whatever, they're very accessible, right? You can get access to them, right? If you're in,
Yeah.
if you don't have the teacher that you want to learn from right next to you, or it's, cost prohibitive to fly to them or whatever, right? You can interact with those, but I've definitely found that I have to come back and re-watch those materials over time as I learn more so that I can actually pick up the knowledge within them. So it's a very inefficient way to learn because I'll sometimes have to watch the same video, 3 or 4 times over a multi-year period to really actually, and I have to intersperse in that actual physical touch of doing the technique or whatever to actually have it crystallize for me. But it is nice that it's accessible.
Yeah, and I say that wholeheartedly as someone who creates content for people to listen to and learn from. Yeah, it's definitely helpful. Like I said, if you live in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, like consume as much of that content as you possibly can. But on the flip side of that coin, like as someone who travels to all these random places and teaches bonsai, one of the differences between students now and students 15 years ago is just like that access to information. And 15 years ago, nobody knew anything about bonsai and very few people can make a good tree. Today, everybody knows everything about bonsai, but still almost nobody can make a good tree. And so like the access to information has not necessarily fixed the make good tree problem. It's definitely helped. And like, the low bar is definitely higher than it was 10, 15 years ago. But, as someone who travels and teaches, like I see firsthand, like I can be in front of a student who has watched hundreds of hours on how to wire a tree and can talk me through and could write basically a dissertation on how to do it. And then they go to put the wire on and they can't do it. And so that's the thing about bonsai is like, if you really want to get good at this, it doesn't matter like if you're in Nebraska and get on a plane, come here, find the best person doing it in Nebraska and go spend some time with them. Like really like getting in person with someone who's better than you. That's really the way to kind of get good fast. Because I had done bonsai for probably 10 to 15 years before my apprenticeship, and I would say like day one of my apprenticeship I didn't really know that much compared to what I feel like I learned after that experience. It's like, yeah, I knew a lot, but I didn't really know a lot.
It didn't result in actual trees getting made. Yeah.
Yeah. I knew how to think about it, how to talk about it, but not necessarily how to
And I think that knowledge is still
physically do
valuable.
it.
Like it primes you to be able to hit the ground running when you started your apprenticeship, right? But
100%.
I agree with you that that's how I felt about my, like the first 4 years of my journey. I was doing bonsai pretty casually, right? But
Hmm.
I spent a lot of hours watching videos and ostensibly working with my trees in my backyard, and I didn't really, like, after that 4 years I didn't have a lot to show for it, right? I wasn't on the
Yeah.
path to actually making really show caliber trees. So you really have to be intentional, and I think that in-person component, in person with someone better than you giving you feedback on a regular
Hmm.
basis is invaluable for bonsai.
That's the way to get good. That's the secret to get good at bonsai fast, is get kind of constant correction and be in that environment where good trees are being made.
Yeah. So kind of a key part of the apprenticeship is the volume, like how much repetition you're getting. If you're spending
Hmm.
9 to 5 every day doing bonsai work 95% of your time, and you're there for
Yeah.
4 years, that's a heck of a lot of hours, like 10,000
Yeah.
plus hours, right?
Well, it's 9 to 5 of like formal work, and then there's like the casual, like, do you have things to do before then and after then. 9 to 5 was like the formal hours, but bonsai really, it's like I say this to. I was just at the Portland Japanese Garden today teaching some beginners, and I say this every time I teach beginners. Having bonsai is like having a dog. Like, you have this other living, high maintenance living being depending on you now. And so if you have a dog, it's not necessarily hard to have a dog, but it's a huge change in your lifestyle. Now you have like something that needs to go to the bathroom several times a day. It needs to be fed several times a day, and probably needs some attention every now and then. And so, like, it's not hard to have a dog, but it's a change in your lifestyle, and that's what bonsai is. It's if you have a dog, you can't just go away for a week without not thinking about it. You gotta plan for what's going to happen. So I tell it to everybody getting into bonsai. It's like, it's not hard. It's just a big change of lifestyle.
I remember whenever one of the first times I visited you, you had a talk at the Portland Japanese Garden, and you said that. I think you said cat, actually. I've been
Okay.
saying cat,
Okay.
but that's something that I do in my little, like, I give a beginner talk sometimes at the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt, and yeah, it's so true that a bonsai it's another thing that's not good as like a gift to someone unsuspecting, because it is a commitment, right?
Yeah, bonsai is one of the worst things to give someone, because giving someone who doesn't do bonsai a bonsai, it's gonna die, and then they're gonna feel terrible about it. It's one of the worst gifts to give somebody who doesn't do bonsai.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for hobbyists on, like, how can they simulate that, pure repetition or number of hours? Like, how can a hobbyist accelerate their journey to getting good whenever
Yeah,
the
yeah.
hours are a
I
little
mean,
constrained, right?
when I was in graduate school, I went to graduate school in New Haven, Connecticut. I had a strong passion for bonsai while I was studying music at a high level there, and so every kind of free day that I could, I'd go spend some time with John Kirby, who lived in Connecticut, and I would pull weeds, I would sift soil, I would just do whatever I could to be around good bonsai, and I think that definitely made me better. So, like, just find that person who's better than you, who's close to you, and go just do bonsai with them. Like, you'll just go help them sift soil for repotting season, or pull weeds in their garden, or unwire their trees with them. Do these mundane tasks, because like when you're in an environment doing bonsai, like I said, like, you don't necessarily have to fly to Portland if you're in Nebraska, but find the best person in Nebraska, and I'm sure they're going to be happy to. We keep
Yeah,
digging on
we're really
Nebraska.
ragging on Nebraska, but
But I think it's a good example, because there's not anybody,
it's not a bonsai
anyone.
mecca. Yeah,
Right,
makes
right.
sense.
So yeah, that's what I did. I mean, that's what I did as a hobbyist. Is I go to every. I went to every national show to see the best trees that I could in person. That's the other thing, is like, this is a 3D art, and so like studying trees, really has to be done in person. Also, like, you can learn a lot from a book, and I even teach my intensive classes with Kokofu catalogs. and we can learn from them, but like seeing a tree in person is a whole nother thing. And I just getting eyes on, physically with trees in person, that's what I did when I was a hobbyist. And I think that really helps me out, kind of priming me for the apprenticeship.
If you were going to, well, I guess that makes sense. Do bonsai with every hour that you have outside of your 9 to 5, right? And you'll get good fast.
Yeah, and go to, like, there's a big bonsai convention happening near you. Like, go to that if you can. The U.S. National Show's happening next month. Cool, go to that if you can. Or if you can't do any of that and your local club's doing an exhibit, like, go volunteer, help out, and find the person who has the nicest trees to your eye in that group and talk to them. But yeah, it's really, really hard to do bonsai in a vacuum. It's really, really hard to do bonsai without seeing and being with them in person.
Yeah, I'm curious. Sam and I were talking a bit about, he did kind of a bonsai internship, right, where he went to Marai for a few months. Um, it's easy to talk about that from a hobbyist perspective that we have of like, here's the value proposition for us as a hobbyist. As a professional, how do you think of taking on an apprentice or having like a little bonsai internship or even just inviting people to work at your garden? How does that factor into the calculus of ultimately you have to run a successful business and so you need to also get stuff from those relationships. I'm sure those are things that you thought about. So I'm just curious if you're general.
Yeah. Rakuyo wouldn't exist without a tremendous group of volunteers who come kind of help out here. And I don't have an apprentice now. I haven't had an apprentice in the past. I'm definitely open to it. Would like to do that in the future. But right now, kind of the main manpower in the garden is both myself and some really trusty volunteers, which you've done a lot to come up and volunteer, so I appreciate that. Maciek, who I do the Deciduous Bonsai podcast with on YouTube, is here kind of once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week, and so we're always working on trees. So yeah, I don't think anybody who has a garden like mine is going to turn down some really enthusiastic help. And so if you like I said, like even just coming here and pulling weeds, like I'll definitely give you some more exciting tasks than that. But I think you can learn a lot just being a fly on the wall and in a really high level place. And yeah, that's how I approach it.
Makes sense. I guess one other thing I wanted to ask before we move on is you travel a lot across the country. What's the most common hurdle that you see for people as hobbyists that are trying to improve at bonsai? Is there like a common thing that unites American practitioners in getting better, like stopping them from getting better?
There's not a common thing, but I think a good teacher will diagnose what that thing is for each individual. So each individual tends to have one or two like things that, and for everybody it's different, but maybe like it's just that they're not watering properly. Maybe it's just that they're too casual about fertilizing. Maybe it's like it's something different for everybody that I've seen. There's not like an overall magic answer. But what I try and do as a teacher is find what that thing is for that student and help them improve on that. And so that's the other tough thing about bonsai is like to do this well professionally. You can be really, really great at bonsai, but a terrible teacher. And vice versa. You can be terrible at bonsai and a good teacher. I strive to be both of those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the tough thing about this business too. And that's why I was really thankful for my music career, because I did a lot of music instruction. I taught undergrads at Yale. I taught private lessons to people for 10 years before switching to bonsai. So I got a lot of kind of practice teaching, and I think that really served me well. Because that's really the job. Like you have to make good trees to get hired, but once you're hired, the main business is teaching other people how to do it.
Yeah, and client management, and yeah, absolutely, and the actual business aspects.
Yeah.
So I guess that takes us to like the sacrifice aspect of bonsai. You don't see a lot of young people, to be honest, doing bonsai. And so I'm curious, what do you think the reasons are for that? And like, what do you have to sacrifice to do bonsai?
Yeah, I mean, you're like it's like having a dog, but just kind of more so. Like you sacrifice. Like someone said when I was leaving the Japanese garden today, they said, "Have a nice weekend." And it's like, I will, but I don't really have a weekend because I have to water the trees, probably 6 times this weekend. And, I have some things that I need to cut back before it's too late. And blah blah blah. So even though like I don't have physical work scheduled, like I don't really get a weekend. Maybe in the wintertime you get a little bit of a break, but then you should be doing other things. With bonsai, you kind of to do it at a high level, you have to be all in. You can't. Bonsai is action. High level bonsai does not happen casually, and so you really do have to give it your all. And that means if you're giving bonsai your all, you're probably not giving something else your all. And so it's easy for me to do that because I don't have any kids. I do have two golden retrievers that demand a lot of attention, as you can maybe hear in the background of this podcast. But yeah, doing bonsai means you're probably not going to be doing a lot of vacations. The trees kind of really do ground you. So that was part of the reason I ended up wanting to stay in Portland was because I live in the place where other people vacation too. So if I ever want to see a nice mountain or go to the beach, I can just do that kind of close to home and not have it be too big of a trip. But yeah, like it's sacrifices. You're sacrificing time and energy. Like you need a lot of time and energy to do bonsai at a high level. And the other thing is I think you get good at bonsai having a lot of trees. Like you're not going to get good at bonsai just having 5 trees. And so that kind of plays into this because, I have 300 trees in my backyard, and I'm not saying everybody needs 300 trees in their backyard. My approach to bonsai is definitely quality over quantity, but you do need quantity to some degree to get that repetition to get good. If you just have one Japanese maple, it's not going to teach you very much about Japanese maples. But if you have 20 Japanese maples, you're going to learn a lot about Japanese maples. And so, especially when you're learning, like now, I feel like I can probably downsize the collection quite a bit. But I think when you're really young in your bonsai kind of knowledge or career, you do need a lot of repetition, and that involves a lot of plants to style, to repot, to learn from. But yeah, main sacrifice I think is time and energy.
That makes sense. I want to dig a little bit deeper on to be really good at bonsai, you have to be all in comment. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting concept. I mean, that probably applies to a lot of things in life, right? To like really be high level, you have to commit. Yeah. But I think bonsai, I think that is doubly true for bonsai. I agree with that statement. You can't like casually get really good because of the size of the collection, because of the demands of the collection, because of the cost of the collection, because of the fact that you need to put so many hours in, right? Like getting good at bonsai takes 10,000 hours or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, those hours are going to come at the expense of other things. And so when you're young, especially, it can be really difficult to make that kind of really hard commitment, especially when you might be moving a lot, right? Or you might not have a lot of backyard space, or you might be living downtown in a city, or all those things kind of compound with kind of an opposite scenario to the optimal conditions for bonsai.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Like you need stability. Like bonsai requires stability. So moving somewhere different every 6 months, your trees are just going to freak out going from Minnesota to California to Denver to like wherever. And they need your kind of like stability and schedule and watering and all those things too. So if you have a very unstable life, if you just had a baby, it's going to be a little bit tricky to do this. Yeah, but it's definitely possible. I have a lot of clients who have young kids, and maybe they're not doing 10 hobbies the way that they're doing bonsai, but bonsai is kind of their one thing outside their family and their career that they kind of focus on.
Yep. The other thing is it's also a hobby where investing deeply gives you exponential returns, right? Oh, mm-hmm. Organizing your workspace or like spacing your home to be specific workspace for doing bonsai and making it very ergonomic. Like it just makes it easier mm-hmm. to get more reps in, right? Because you spend mm-hmm. less time doing X, Y, and Z, and right, or
or choosing. Yeah, or like choosing which home to live in. Like that's a big question for a lot of my students. Is like when most of my students are buying homes now, they'll say, "Hey, can you like check this on Google Maps and make sure like the light looks okay?" Like,
I know, like, it's savage.
It's very much a thing. Like if you're moving and you have choices, like making a choice that's going to work well for your trees is part of doing bonsai at a high level.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I've thought a lot about and looked at like shade apps that show you like the angle of the sun in the backyard and stuff like that. Yeah, it's very mm-hmm. important as a hobby or just in general doing bonsai.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think bonsai, I think that's why you see primarily bonsai being done by folks later in their life because they have that stability, right? And that's hard stability
Hmm.
to get when you're young. And so, or it's just not a sacrifice you're willing to make. Like you want to go and take those 1 month vacations to Europe or whatever, right? And it's not like it's not impossible. You can still have people water your garden. You can set up automated systems. You can have a
Yeah.
smaller collection. So it's feasible, but
But you're
it
kind of
definitely,
you're planning around
yes.
it, right? And so like it's like I travel a lot for work too, but if I'm taking longer trips, then I'm doing that in the wintertime rather than the summertime, for all of my trips, I do unlike a lot of bonsai professionals, like it's really important for me to not leave the garden for too long of a time at once. So, rather than kind of compound 2 or 3 trips together, I'll get on an extra flight and fly home in between trips, just so that I might do 4 or 5 days on the road, and then I get 4 or 5 days at home, like just with the trees. So it's also important so you don't miss that kind of seasonal difference. I could make my life a lot easier and probably be on an airplane a lot less if I just stacked 3 or 4 trips together. But then I'd be gone for a month, and I'd miss out on all my spring pinching or some other thing. And so like I really I make my travel life very difficult so that my trees get,
The best
that
experience.
advantage.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
At
so
least you
it
rack up
really
some
is.
extra flyer miles,
Well,
but
I rack up a lot of flyer miles, so I get some free trips to Japan. Yeah, it's literally planned. I just have 2 dogs, so it's not like I have a really complicated life, but I plan my life around my trees. And then like the fun parts of my life happen, planned around that. And I think for anybody who's getting a tree into the Pacific Bonsai Expo who has kind of high level bonsai, like they're kind of doing the same to a degree. Like, yeah, maybe they have a family or a career or something that's like complicating things to a degree, but they're really planning a lot of the people that I know who do bonsai at a really high level. They kind of have to plan their vacations, their everything around the trees.
yep. We've kind of painted a little bit of a bleak picture of the sacrifices, but
Yeah.
I think it depends, like, what is a sacrifice and what isn't a sacrifice also depends on the person, right? Maybe, maybe you hate leaving your home and it's like, oh, or maybe you don't live in the downtown in a city and you have a backyard. Like, maybe those
Hmm.
sacrifices aren't sacrifices to you, right? So I think there's two things, there's different aspects to it, but I don't think everybody who does this at a really high level like agrees that those sacrifices are worthwhile and
Yeah.
enjoys living the bonsai lifestyle.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think it's like you said, like they're sacrifices, but I don't necessarily think of it that way. Like it's just kind of
It's more like
the expect.
accommodations. Yeah, it's like
Yeah, and it's kind of the expectation. Like if you're gonna do something at the highest level, and you don't have to be a professional to do this at a highest level. You look at someone like Jeremiah Lee, who gets great trees into the expo, has a really killer private collection. He's doing bonsai at a really high level. He still has all the same constraints that I do in my life in regards to getting away and all those difficulties. But we don't think about it negatively because we care about the tree so much that like that's just how life is going to be. That's just like the only option. And so you kind of can't have this really casual free lifestyle and do bonsai at the same time. Those two things aren't congruent with each other.
yep. I wonder if that's a barrier to it ever being a more widespread hobby or pursuit in the U.S.
Yeah, it'll never. I think it's going to get mass attention and mass like how do I say this popularity. And bonsai is so popular, it's ridiculous. But like we're never going to have more than 1,000 people who can make trees at the Pacific Bonsai Expo level. Like it's just I think that's one of the factors is like you really do have to give it your all to have the highest quality. And so like there's just a very small percentage of the public who are going to want to do that. But anybody who does, we welcome them and we we share in their craziness to want to build their life around the multi lifestyle.
Yeah, that has interesting implications for the market and business of bonsai, but maybe a little bit outside of the scope of this podcast. But it's
Yeah,
interesting thought.
yeah. In Japan, what I think is super cool is like not everybody who loves bonsai actually has to do bonsai. Obviously there is a system where you can if you have some disposable income, you can have trees that don't even live at your house, right? That's what a lot of people do in Japan. If you go to Komura's garden, most of those trees are owned by other people who don't water them every day, who don't wire them, who don't, only see them maybe a few days a year. But The other factor of that is there's a lot of people who go to every bonsai show in Japan who don't have trees at home. They don't have trees at a professional's garden. They just love bonsai. They love the community. And so there's a lot of different ways to partake in the hobby other than physically doing it. And I think in America, we're kind of a very do-it-yourself culture. There's like that aspect to it. But yeah, that's not the only way to do bonsai.
That's very interesting that you brought up. I hadn't really thought about that. Maybe you just answered it, but do you think that's a cultural thing? Do you think that's a maturity of the hobby thing? Do you think it's a visibility thing? I'm curious why, because I was trying to think of counterexamples, but everyone I know who has high quality trees or is putting trees in the expo, I mean, they're either like a professional or they're working with a professional, but a majority of them actually keep the trees in their own garden and like do some of the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And definitely like some of the work along the tree's lifeline of like watering it and fertilizing it and stuff like that. So we don't have that same model as they do in Japan.
Yeah, it definitely exists in the United States, but it's under 1% of high level bonsai is a tree that's living in my garden that the person only sees a few days a year. Yeah, I think there is definitely like a need to do it yourself, almost to a detriment in the United States. I think that's one way that we could really elevate every bonsai in the US is having people work with a professional, just because like not just to pay the professional. And there's obviously not everybody who's a professional makes really high level trees, but working with someone, having a teacher, that is a way to kind of jumpstart some success in bonsai. Especially if you have a tree that's in front of you that you've been kind of stuck with, it's not really going anywhere, a professional might be able to give some sort of insight into how to kind of get that going on a new path or a different path. So that's not to say that a professional needs to do everything, but in America, it is probably 90% of my time is teaching and 10% of my time is actually doing work on someone else's tree, versus in Japan, if you were a professional, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And that's probably why the bonsai are better in Japan to a degree. And it's weird because we don't necessarily think of that with other things. Like if you have a issue with your air conditioner, Addison, are you going to like fix that yourself, or you're going to call the AC guy?
Well, I would try looking it up on a YouTube video, but if it looked like if there was one too many wrenches required, I would instantly. Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
If you get bugs in your house, you're going to call an exterminator. We hire a lot of other things out, but we don't tend to do that with bonsai, or maybe our hobbies to a degree. And certainly some people do, but yeah, that's a big difference from the US and Japan.
Yeah. I wonder if that's cultural or what. I mean, I think I'm probably the epitome, and like this podcast, Bonsai Builders, is kind of the epitome of, I want to learn how to do it myself, right? So I'm the problem, but
you're not the problem, because you seek out teachers to study with. I mean, you've been taking classes at Mirai this year. You've come up with and worked at my place several times. So you are seeking help from a qualified teacher.
Absolutely. I just meant I'm curious why, like for me, I haven't really examined this a lot, but for my own trees, like I want them to be a expression of my abilities in the hobby. To some extent, I think of if I like outsource the work of working on my tree, then it doesn't necessarily represent my mastery of the craft, right? So for me, that's trying to build these artistry skills. It's important for my collection to represent like my actual skills. A tree shouldn't look better than I can make it look, and it should always look the best that I can make it look, right? Not that everybody has to do that, and I think professionals are like, the tree's going to look better, right? So there's certainly a place for that. For me personally, it like aligns a little bit less with my goals. I'm ultra happy to pay with my time or my money to learn from professionals, because that supports my goal of, being able to emulate what they're doing.
And there's a lot of different ways to work with a professional too. Like I have some clients where I show up, I work on their trees, they're not even there because there's some billionaire on their yacht doing some other thing in the world. And then I have some clients that I show up for, and I don't touch a single tree the entire 3 or 4 days that I'm there, because they want to do everything and kind of get that 100% of that experience. Maybe I demonstrate, but they do 100% of the work. And then where most of my clients are at is there's some of both. I'm sitting there working on a tree, but they are too, and you're kind of working together at it. And that's where I think that can be super beneficial, because you're not only learning and getting some reps in, but you're seeing this kind of, you're seeing the work happen right next to you at the same time, and that can have a lot.
Yeah, so you're still learning. It's like you're learning, but also you're accelerating your speed to having your collection look better, right?
Yeah,
So I could definitely relate with that. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. A few really cool points that I had never thought about. That the latest point you brought up of bonsai as a business in the US is like a higher percentage of teaching and a little bit less percentage of, doing work on clients' trees. I mean, you do all that building in your own garden, right? But that sounds like when you're working with clients, a lot of times there's more of an expectation of, I want to learn how to do this while we're doing the work, So it's very cool. It's an interesting aspect. It'll be interesting to see if, as the hobby matures, if there's more room for that. I think that only underscores, though, your choice in the beginning of doing an apprenticeship in the U.S. because, your knowledge of Japanese when you're going to teach people would not be, that doesn't help.
Yeah, I felt
American
like
clients in America.
Yeah, I think like going to Japan gets you like a resume advantage. Like some people, like for some reason, like there's a mental thing, like if you study bonsai in Japan, you know more than if you study bonsai in America. But I think practically speaking, you have a much stronger advantage studying bonsai in America than Japan, because in America, you're going to work on young bonsai, you're going to work on old bonsai, you're going to work on good bonsai, you're going to work on bad bonsai. You're going to work on Japanese trees, American trees. Like I feel like my apprenticeship, I got kind of the liberal arts degree of bonsai. We worked on trees that were wild Yamadori that we had just dug up, which you'd never work on in Japan, versus trees that have been in a bonsai pot for 100 years. We were growing chochibai from cuttings, and we also had a 100-year-old chochibai that was totally pot grown. So I feel like that was the big advantage of my apprenticeship, is I got that kind of liberal arts bonsai education that kind of directly applied. Like the moment I started working privately, that I didn't have to recalibrate anything. Like it was, all of that information was directly knowledgeable, and that's why I think it's really important. Like if you want to learn, if you live in Florida and you're growing like ficus, like probably don't come here to study. Like go see Eric Weigert. But it's not to say that I don't have anything to teach you about ficus. I love ficus and I work on a lot of them. but like, or if you live in like LA and you're growing a lot of olives and things like that, don't go learn from someone who lives in Minnesota or something, because they're going to be growing a lot of different plants that might not be. It's like, it's not just study with someone who's going to, whose trees you emotionally and work who you emotionally respond to, but try and study in a place where the material there is actually the same material that you're going to be growing. I think that's helpful too.
Yeah, to some extent, it's almost the same problem as watching videos online, right? It's like, oh, I'm getting reps hands-on, but it's not actually on the things that I'm going to be working with, right? So
yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, very, very cool conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time tonight. And the dogs were really well behaved, so
we tried.
Birch and Bailey, they get an extra treat, I think, after this.
Give them an extra treat. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. This was great. I really love what you're doing. I think you have a great background, because you are someone who's not giving up your life to do an apprenticeship, but you're doing everything you can to learn bonsai at a high level, and you're doing all the right things. So I think like anybody listening to this podcast like is listening to the right person, because you're living what you're kind of preaching to a degree. So it was a lot of fun to come on and chat with you about it. Yeah, anyone who wants to find me, I'm Andrew Robson, Rakuyo Bonsai. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube. But yeah, happy to come on and chat. And anyone who's ever passing through Portland is more than welcome to visit Rakuyo. Just send us an email and we'll get you scheduled to come by the garden.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to have you as a friend and a teacher. For anyone listening today, if there's things that you have questions about or surprised you, don't hesitate to leave a comment or reach out to me at Teeny Trees on Instagram. You can also follow up with Andrew and see if there's anything he can clarify about his apprenticeship if you have questions. Join us next week on the Bonsai Builders Podcast.